Hi, this is Carson with Troy, and I have with me Dan Willis. Now, Dan is a fantasy author, and some of his works include the Arcane Casebook, which is fantastic. The latest is Equal and Opposite, Book 11, which came out in October. Is that right?
Yeah,
In
yep.
October, so that's the latest one, brand new. He also does the Arcane Regulars, kind of a spin-off of the Arcane Casebook. He's done the Shattered West, Dragons of the Confederacy, and you've also written for Wizard of the Coast, and
Yep.
you've written in the Dragonlance world.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
Dan, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and your books.
Well, I'm Dan Willis, and I grew up in Maryland, right at the Chesapeake Bay, and lived there until I came to college. I came to college in Utah, and I've been here ever since. And well, I've always loved to write. I think the first story I ever wrote was in fourth grade. They were supposed to write a Halloween story. I still have that. Uh, it's the kind of story you expect a fourth grader to write, but I have it. And I've been, kind of obsessed with fiction ever since. And I got a chance to write for Wizards of the Coast. I'm very grateful for that. That basically taught me what I needed to know about how to write and how to meet deadlines and all that good stuff. You have to excuse me. I've been sick. My voice is a little weak, but and then I got out of writing because I just didn't have the patience to go around and try to sell a book to book companies. That's a thing that usually takes years. And I was like, yeah, I was a computer programmer at the time. I was making good money, and I came back to writing when someone started to explain to me what indie writing was. And I realized that there's some ups and downs in indie writing, but one of the nice things is you can sell your story directly to people who want to read it. And just because a publisher doesn't think your story is good or is marketable, usually it's marketability. They look at it and go, well, it's a great story, but who's going to read it? And they don't want to put the time or the effort into it, and that's fine. It's their business bottom line. That's their responsibility is to find things that they can weave into whatever they're already doing. And I write my Arcane Casebook series is a fantasy detective story set in the 1930s. So it's kind of niche, and it's magical realism, which means that magic is out. People know magic exists, so it's a world where there are technology exists right alongside magic, and they work together to do things that we do in the normal world. And so I decided to get into indie writing, and I took a book that I had just written, which was In Plain Sight, the first book of the Arcane Casebook series, and I went indie with it, and it exploded, and I never looked back. Is it the most popular indie book ever written? No, but it does very well, and the series does very well. And I'm not going to break my arm, pat myself on the back, but it's just true. And so I've really enjoyed that. It's a lot of work because you really have to get at least two books out a year. Three would be better, and so that's a fair pace. But I really enjoyed it, and I've written some great stuff along the way. I wrote the Dragons of the Confederacy series with Tracy Hickman, who's always been a friend of mine and a mentor to me. He's the one that told me the most important thing to know about writing, which is it takes 10 years to become an overnight success. So done that, and then Shattered West was a YA steampunk book that I wrote called the series. I was going to do a series around it called The Shattered West. The book was called The Flux Engine, and I enjoyed it, but it didn't really get any traction. And I get a lot of people now who they like me and they've gone back and read it. They go, "Are you ever going to try to sequel to that?" I'm like, if I have the time. so so yeah, it's probably not going anywhere for a while. But yeah, that's basically my journey as a writer. It's a lot of do the work. So I have no impressive. I was discovered by so and so. Yeah, in fact, I back in 2000 and I want to say six, maybe it was 2008. I sat next to this brand new writer who just had a book out, and he was so new that he didn't have any books to sell, and so we were just sitting there side by side at this little tiny convention that had just started up, and he had a few people come up and talk to him. I had a few people come up and talk to me, and that guy was Brandon Sanderson. And so I like to remind everybody starts at zero. So it's been a fun trip. So that's me. I'm married. I've got four kids. Two of them are out of the house. One of them's at college, and One of them is just finishing up high school. So,
Fun. Thanks for that summary. It looks like you had kind of an interesting career along the way. Let's go back to the very beginning with Dragonlance and Wizard of the Coast. How did you get that job, and what was it like writing in Dragonlance's universe?
well, I got that job because I knew Tracy Hickman. And Tracy looked at basically I'd been after Tracy look at some of my writing, give me some pointers. And legally, people who are writers really shouldn't look at other people's work because what happens is if you're, let's say I'm like, two chapters away from finishing a story and somebody says, hey, look at my book. And I look at their book and it's exactly like what I'm writing. And so then my book comes out, 6 months later, and then they sue me for stealing their book, you know. And so it's better if you're a professional writer not to read other people's unpublished fiction. The funny part is you could steal from people's published fiction all the time if you wanted to. Yeah, it's out there in the public. But Tracy, he knew me well enough, and he said, "Listen, I don't usually do this, but I'll look at your fiction." And so he looked at it. He said, "You know how to write. You just need to, you just need your foot in the door." And he says, "I can help you with that." And he pointed me over to a guy whose name I have just forgotten, who was a wonderful guy over at Wizards of the Coast. And he looked at it and said, "Yeah, why don't you write for one of our anthologies coming up?" And it was called uh, "The Dragons of the War of Souls," and it had a subtitle. And so it was the worst title ever. But so I wrote this story for them, and it was in the fourth age or fifth age of Dragons, fourth age of Dragonlance. And I had read the fourth age books, and so I was fairly familiar with the setting and what was going on at the time. And it turned out to be a really good story. And Margaret Weiss liked it, who she was the editor at the time. And so the head of the book division gave me more opportunities. They were playing catch up to Harry Potter at the time, and so they wanted to do this YA Dragonlance series, but they wanted it to come out really fast. Excuse me. And so what they did was they took a story, a general story arc that they had come up with, and they broke it into 4 books, and they had different authors write each book. And that's as goofy as it sounds. But I was offered the third book in the first was it Dragonlance: The New Adventures is what they called it, and it was their YA brand. And the third book is really a good place to be because that's the part where they've just faced, the long dark night of the soul. They've just been, the bad guys just beating their crap out of them, and they have to figure out what went wrong and regroup into a team so they can face the big bad guy in the fourth book. So I got that, the training montage sequences. That's what my book was, and I had a lot of fun writing it. And what's funny is my book actually was turned in before the other first book was even finished. So,
Oh,
but uh, but it's okay. We all had each other's notes, and we knew what was going on. The only note that I didn't get was apparently there was a character in the second book. He was introduced in the second book. He was a Minotaur, and he just disappears because I didn't know he existed. So, but people gave us a lot of latitude on that, so it was good. And then those books did well enough. They wanted to do a second series. I got the third book again, and that book sold better than any book in all the other series. Not because I'm an excellent writer, but because it had an awesome cover. But it had this guy with a sword over his shoulder who looked like this, Han Solo kind of happy-go-lucky, adventurous character, and behind him is this huge skeletal knight with this enormous sword, holding it, like this, with lightning coming off. I'm like, a cover like that, any book could sell. Excuse me, part of being sick, I got a dry mouth. But anyway, the so I then did a third series, which was a trilogy, and called Wizards. My book was called Wizards Return, and there was a main character in the YA books, both series, and I invented a sister for her who had been left behind when this older sister went out to adventure. And this sister is she was going to be the bad guy of the series because she had this absolutely hate on for her older sister because her mother was just this controlling, passive aggressive bitch, and and so I wrote the first chapter. It was so, I mean, this woman was so sickly sweet, but just so derogatory. So she just abused this little girl so much. I wanted you to really feel for her. So when she turned out to be the bad guy, you're like, what? But and I sent it in to the guys to look at just to make sure I was on the right track. And like, oh, her mother's dead. She lives with her father. I'm like, I invented this character. What the hell are you talking about? Well, somebody had liked this character so much that they had built an entire trilogy around her and had wanted, a second after the one we were working on and wanted to use. And so he built this whole backstory for her. I'm like, well, tell him to screw off. I mean, this is Michael, but it turned out that was like the head editor. So
Oh,
they got their wish. So I had to rewrite the whole thing so
oh,
that she had that this younger sister had to have other motivations for being the bad guy other than you left me with our horrible mother.
yeah,
But anyway, so writing in other people's sandboxes can be fun, but every once in a while you run up against hard walls and you're like, well, wait a minute,
yeah.
So, but I got to do what everybody who writes in someone else's sandbox wants to do, which is I created a new type of dragon for Dragonlance. I mean, I don't know if it was ever been used, but it was basically just a ghost dragon, and it had its breath caused things to age. And so I was given my first book that I did called The Dragon Well, and it was just this tortured dragon spirit that was trying to get free and had been bound to this place, and it destroyed the place with its breath and then disappeared. So that's the only instance, but as far as I know, it's the only time that ever happened. But the other one, I invented these weapons called dragon claws, which are a lot like tonfas. If you've ever seen any of those police batons with the handle,
Hmm.
except it was just like take a sword blade for a dragonborn, some big huge thing, cut the handle off, cut a hole in the back so you can hold it, and then you just basically have a giant blade you can wield. And those are called dragon claws. And I've seen two other instances where authors used them. So, like, yay, I added something to the Dragonlance continuality. But and every author who ever writes something in someone else's sandbox wants to do that. So I got the chance to do that. It was a lot of fun. I was lining up. I was in talks with Stacy Whitman, who was the head editor of the fiction. They had just started their own fiction line. She was local, so I knew her. We'd met personally, and I was in talks with her to try and do a series of my own because they were going to do non D&D connected series. And right about then, Hasbro bought Wizards of the Coast. No, Hasbro had already bought them, but they got a new CEO at Hasbro. That's what had happened. And the CEO did what CEOs are supposed to do. He looked at the books and he went, "Well, D&D is making money, not much money, but money. You know, uh, uh, Magic the Gathering, which was the other property was the Coast had, is a license to print money. I mean, it's incredible. And then they got this fiction line, which is losing this money. Why are we in the book business?" And he was smart enough that he looked at the book business and he went, you know what? Amazon is starting to allow people to print their own or to publish their own books. That's going to kill the bookstores. That's kill our business. We're going to lose millions. And so he shut down the fiction line entirely. And as a writer, I was not happy about that. But you know, as somebody who's invested in companies, looking back, I'm like, yeah, he did exactly what he was supposed to do. Not be popular, but be fiscally responsible. Anyway, and then of course the indie phenomenon happened. Bookstores basically went the way of the wild goose. I don't think there are any bookstore chains out there. Barnes and Noble's still alive. I mean, I know they were for a while, and they basically turned into selling Legos and music and other things. They don't sell books as much. They have them, but most of them are gone. And what you really see now are indie bookstores. Some little hole in the wall where they sell used books. They've got some new books, and that's great. As a writer, you have to be a reader. So I love books. I have quite the collection. Unfortunately, my shelves have been here empty because this is my new office, and I haven't quite got everything decked out yet. But yeah, I've kept all my old books, but I've also fallen into the trap of I have a Kindle. It's right there, sitting on my couch, and all my books. If I buy a book now, I don't buy a physical book because I'm 56 years old and I've moved enough times that I don't want to schlep an entire bookshelf full of books from one place to another. I mean that's a great way to screw up your back. So
Yeah,
so I put all my books in my Kindle and I love having them there because I can take my phone and I can if I'm waiting in the doctor's office I can just jump right into my favorite part of David Eddings or Terry Pratchett or anything. Pick an author, jump in, read my favorite sections because they're all bookmarked. And if I just want to start a new book, I can just sit there and start a new book while I wait for the dentist to get to me.
yeah.
So anyway, that's a long rambling story about me and Dragonlance. I had a I actually I forgot there are no orcs in Dragonlance, so I put a reference to an orcish war band in my short story, and even Margaret Weiss didn't catch it. And
Oh,
so people still give me crap about that to this day. I'm like, we all make mistakes. It happens. You just, move on.
well, it sounds like you had a lot of fun writing the Dragonlance stories and working with
I
Wizards of
did.
the Coast.
I mean, it's work. Don't get me wrong. Writing is
Right.
always work. And people, you must find, you get up in the morning and you just get sit down and write. And I'm like, no, I get up in the morning and I do all my chores because I got to keep, I have a house and it has to, there are things you have to do. And then I sit down in front of a white screen and a blinking cursor, and it mocks me for several hours while I think, try to figure out what to write. So,
Well, let's
yeah,
talk
sorry.
about no, let's talk about your daily habits. What have you found for yourself that has made you successful?
Well, yeah, for me, I treat writing like a regular full time job. I do 5 chapters a week. I write a chapter a day, and that usually is 4 to 5 hours. But I have ADD like a puppy, and sometimes I'll sit in front of the computer and my brain will go, "You forgot to do X." Oh, I can do that real quick. And I get up and do that, and then it's 6 hours before I get back to the computer. And so ADD people do great under really close deadlines. So sometimes it's 9 o'clock at night, and my brain goes, "You have to start now to finish today." I'm like, "Boom!" I'm off to the races. I'm like, "Why couldn't I do this at 10 o'clock in the morning? Yeah, I'd have been done hours ago. I could play some video games."
Yeah.
So that's what I try to do is I try to make sure that I get going at least by 10 o'clock in the morning because I get up and I check my book sales stats and check my ads, make sure they're running, and like prune ads aren't doing well, and I try to add new ads so that there's churn in there, so you make sure that people aren't looking at the same thing over and over again. And if there's people who've sent me emails, I have to respond to those. That's my morning, ball of stuff I don't want to do but needs to be done for the business. And now I'll usually jump in the shower. Now it's time out of the shower. It's like, okay, new day. I'll come in here and sit down and start working on whatever today's chapter is. So, chapter for me is about 3,000 words. And I've done this so long that I'll be typing along and I'm coming up to the end of the chapter and I'm like, oh, this is where it needs to end. And I look at go down and I look at the word counter and it's like 2,987 words. Aha. I can just feel when I'm getting to 3,000. So, but it's worked well. The chapters it's a fairly short chapter, and it flows nicely. A lot of people say, "I sat down and read your book in one sitting." I'm like, "It's a 90,000 word book, not short. How did you do that in one sitting?" Well, it's fast read. I use short sentences, short paragraphs. I don't have any of that great wall of text like you get with Marion Zimmer Bradley and Mist of Avalon, where there's a paragraph that goes on for 3 pages. And nothing wrong with that. That's just a different style. And of course, the Mist of Avalon is 4 times longer than any of my books. Yeah, that's a beast. But yeah, a lot of people like to do the big descriptive wall. I like to do a lot of my exposition comes in dialogue, people talking to each other. It's a detective story. The detective goes places and he talks to people and he gathers information. So there's very little, walls of text where it's like he sits down and he reads, a book for 4 hours and he's trying to get clues out of his book or something. I don't do that. It's mostly if he reads the book for 4 hours, I mentioned, 4 hours later, he got up from the table. So that's how that happens. But so I read my books are fairly quick reads from the standpoint of I don't have things that slow the reader down. And yeah, maybe that's a bad thing to do because they think my books are short when they're really not. But but I don't know. I find it if I could sit down and read a book and it's fun and it moves and I don't ever look at my watch. What time is it? Yeah, that's what you never want to read or look at their watch.
Right.
You want them to think, oh, one more chapter, it won't hurt. Yeah, and suddenly they're
Exactly.
done,
Yeah.
and then they want more. So, but yeah, it's a different philosophy. I mean, every writer has their own thing. They've got their own way of writing, the way they tell the story, and for there's a different one for every writer. No two writers are ever the same. And you go to writing conferences sometimes. Yeah, we met out at Author Nation in November, and sometimes people are like, "Very, this is how you must write the book." And if you find out that you did not write the book our way, we will come over to your house and make you write the book our way because we have ways of making you write the book. Yeah. And it was like, I'm one of those people who edits as they write. So I'll write a sentence like, ooh, that's not quite right. And I'll shave off a corner somewhere, too many words here, not enough words there. And people, oh man, I tell it to people, they have, it's just, well, sorry, I'm going to use a Sanford Son reference. You're too young to get that. But, it's like they have a heart attack. And, just don't. If you put time in the front and words are coming out the back, it's working for you and you should keep doing it. Are there ways you might be able to get more words? Sure. Try out some new things, see if they work. But if they don't work, don't let anybody tell you you're writing wrong as long as words are coming out the back. If you're not producing any words, then yeah, you're writing wrong. Yeah. But I mean, these are obvious things to me, but some people it's like revelation.
No,
So
that's some great advice. And that's the reason why, if you go back and listen to my episodes, I ask pretty much the same questions to everybody because what works for Dan might not work for, say, like Jim Butcher or Larry Correa, and what works for them might
sure.
not work for you. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
I try to kind of keep it simple and ask the same questions because even though I'm asking the same questions, the podcasts are, or each episode is totally different because everybody's experiences are different.
Yeah.
So, let's talk about the Arcane Casebook. What was the genesis? Like, do you come up with, say, like a plot first, or did Alex Lockerbie like march in your mind and you're like, oh, I have to write this
Well,
down? How did that come about?
when you ask what is the genesis, you want the answer to the question of how did I come up with this series in the first place? Or do you want to know how I come up with each book and the mysteries and the stories within? Because I can answer both questions, but what do you want first?
Let's do the genesis, how you first came up with it, and then let's deep dive into each book, your process.
Okay. This entire series, the Arcane Casebook series, exists because Jim Butcher got divorced. See, I'm a huge Dresden Files fan. I love his work. And he got divorced, and I don't remember when this was, but it had to be back somewhere in the 2015 to 2018 era. And it was like 5 years he didn't write a book. And the reason was, of course, if he put out a new book, then that gets tied up in the divorce, and it's just a mess. And so he's like, his lawyer's like, as long as you're, getting divorced, you can't put out any new books because that's more money that your wife's lawyer is going to try to get, or they're going to try to tie about the legal rights. So anyway, I was not privy to any of this. I'm just surmising, so don't quote me on any of this. And Jim Butcher, if you're watching, I got no, this is just me thinking. Uh, and Jim's a nice guy. I've met him. And anyway, they got divorced and he didn't write any books. And my appetite for detective, fantasy detective fiction I was not getting fed, that itch wasn't getting scratched. And so like, well, you're a writer, write a fantasy detective story, scratch the itch yourself. And so I said, well, I could do that, but I don't want it to just be a copy of Jim Butcher. I don't want to write Dresden fan fiction. And so I started thinking, well, how, if you have a detective and he has magical abilities, how does that work? Because Jim's stuff, he started off telling detective stories, but by about book 3 or 4, when he was really starting to figure out who Harry Dresden was, and he'll tell you this, so and this is not me speaking out of school, he stopped telling detective stories and started telling monster hunter stories. For the most part, Dresden is a monster hunter. There's a few detective-y things that go on in the books later, but for the most part, there's bad guys doing bad things and he has to stop them. And I saw like, well, what if I focus more on the detective side? Well, then how does magic figure in? And I'm like, well, the problem with a lot of these magic detective stories, and there's a few I could name that I'm not going to because I don't want to, my opinion's my opinion, and that's that. But there's a few of these stories where the detective is so overpowered, or the magical figure is so overpowered, you wonder why he has to solve cases at all, uh, and you wonder why he doesn't solve them immediately. When it gets to the end, he's wielding these godlike abilities. Like, well, why wasn't he doing that back in chapter 4?
Right.
But and so I decided that I wanted a detective who had little magic, a hedge wizard, somebody who had some useful skills, but what he really had was the smarts to take those skills and do something clever with them. And so what I ended up with was this idea that what I have is a magical CSI in the time period when forensic science didn't exist. They'd barely begun using fingerprints in the 1920s and 30s. I can't remember the first case to use fingerprints was the theft of some billiard balls, and they found the guy's fingerprints on the stolen billiard balls, and they knew it was him.
Oh,
Cool, but they really didn't have, you didn't have crime scene people that would come. Yeah, the cops would come in, they take some pictures because they weren't stupid, But you didn't have guys that would do that meticulous CSI examination of a crime scene looking for minute evidence. And so I figured my detective, Alex Lockerbie, he has these skills that'll let him find fingerprints and bodily fluids and chemical residue and stuff like that will then enable him to solve crime in a way that the regular police can't. And so, and that was my genesis of it. It turned into a little something different, but it's still pretty close to that original thesis. And like I said, I wrote it because Jim Butcher wouldn't write any books, and I needed to read some detective fiction, and so I wrote one. And a lot of people say, "Well, isn't your character just Dresden?" I'm like, oh no, very different,
Yeah,
very different from Dresden. The world's very different. Dresden fights, creatures from legend and mythology. In my books, there are no mythological creatures. The bad guys are human, and that's pretty bad. So humans are some of the best monsters around. So yeah,
yeah. No, before
excuse
before
me.
we go on to how you break down each book and stuff, I just want to point out you put a golden nugget in there for writing interesting characters. Is the more limited they are and the cleverness of how they use their limitations is way more interesting than just an all powerful god
Well, and
being
that's
able to do stuff.
that's what
For me,
Butcher did with in book four, which is Summer Night, is the first time you get to see Dresden go up against somebody who's not in his weight class. But it's sort of the Batman effect. He had enough time to prepare that he thought about what are their weaknesses and how can I use the little abilities that I have in ways that can compensate for this all powerful being. And it really is very clever. And when you get to the end, it's, whenever you're writing mysteries, you want to make sure that when you get to the end and the bad guy is revealed or something happens, everybody goes, oh, of course, because all the pieces had been seeded previously in ways that didn't make a lot of sense at the time because you didn't know what the connection was. But as soon as the connection's made, it's all perfectly clear, you know.
right?
And Butcher does that very well. Although now people look for it because everybody knows what to expect, and then you have to kind of make left turns, give people red herrings that don't actually mean anything, so that they go off on strange paths. And when they get to the reveal, they're like, "Oh, how could I have missed that?"
Right. Well, you've done that very well with Alex as well. I mean, I've only read up to I'm on book 7, so I've read 6 of the books. And book 6, Alex Lockerbie is way different from book 1. Alex Lockerbie, he's
Oh
grown,
yeah.
he has developed, he's learned, and it's you've done a very good job at doing that and laying that foreshadowing and groundwork up to where he is now.
Yeah. Yeah, my worry was that Alex was getting a little too powerful. But I do some things in later books to curb that a little. But we're now coming to the part where all that's unraveling, and I'm worried about where we're going from. World War II is about to start. Where this latest book takes place in March or April of 1939. Now, of course, September 39, Hitler goes into Poland, and World War II starts. So we are right on the cusp of World War II. The next book will probably be the start of World War II. Alex may not be a part of that yet, but the U.S. actually, I hadn't thought about this, but until we were just talking, but the U.S. actually knew that World War II was coming, and they started a draft. I got to find out when they did that because they started drafting people to staff up the army well before the U.S. entered World War II. Yeah. Maybe Alex gets drafted. I hadn't thought about that. That's a good idea. Somebody should be
Well,
writing this down.
if that happens, I'll be like, "Oh, I was there when Dan came up with that. I helped trigger some sort of memory."
There's a lot of I watch a lot of historical stuff on YouTube and people talking about stuff that went on during World War II. I mean, and a lot of this you wouldn't believe. I mean, you really want to have a fun time. Look up the Horton 229. It's an airplane, and it was built by the Nazis, and it never saw production. It was too late in the war, but it was a wooden jet plane, and it was a monowing, so it looked like a boomerang, you know
Oh wow.
and it was an incredible piece of machinery, and nobody knew about it until I don't know years later, maybe a decade later. Somebody found a buried top secret German thing in workshop in a hillside, and in it was there were two versions of the 229, and one of them is now at the you can I don't know if you can see it, but the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. I mean, I know that's NASA. The Smithsonian's Aeronautical Museum uh, has the pieces of the 229. I don't know if it's on display, but I know I know they have it. So, and it's just like one of those things. Is like nobody knows about this stuff because by the time people found out about it, it was old news. But I
Yeah.
mean, if Hitler had those things, might have been a whole different war because it was a seriously ahead of its time plan. A lot of what the Nazis did was seriously ahead of its time. They had some very smart people working for them, you know. But anyway,
So
that's neither here nor there.
Alex. So in this next book, Alex, World War II is on the cusp. Who knows what's going to happen? You told me you're planning on 20 books. How do you plan each book? How do you determine which mysteries to
Okay.
solve?
I lay out my books very methodically because if I don't, they don't get done. And I have two stories in each book and a what I call a tertiary story, which is like a third plot thread that weaves through that sometimes gets resolved and sometimes doesn't. But so I'm basically telling two stories, and what I'll do is I'll outline one story and I'll on the other story. And the tertiary story in the beginning, it always linked back into one of the two major stories, but people began to expect that, so then I had to stop doing it. But but the main story is whatever the book is really about, and uh, a lot of time now. The beautiful thing about writing mysteries is that you can get ideas for mysteries from anywhere. There are thousands of mystery TV shows that have run during the history of television, and all you got to do is go out to iTunes and buy a series of something, and you can get 100 ideas from just episodes of various TV shows. Not to mention the true crime podcasts. Uh, so there's plenty of places to get ideas. The trick is to take an idea and go, okay, here's an idea where somebody killed somebody because they wanted their inheritance, which is a fairly basic plot. How do I twist that? Well, here's somebody who killed somebody because the person that they're in business with is going to get the inheritance, and then they can get this because they're not related. They have no chance of getting the inheritance. And then they can get some piece of information that is known to have been held by whoever they killed. Yeah. And you start twisting it and you twist it some more and you twist it some more until it turns into something it never was before. No one gets to recognize it. And you look like a genius. And all you did was take some existing information and play with it. So that's usually what I do. I get a lot of ideas from places like old TV shows like Castle, Elementary, and CSI. I love those shows. And, just find an interesting plot and then just start playing with it. And then, of course, the other thing is these stories take place in the 1930s. And so I have to kind of be aware of what was going on politically in the 1930s. What was New York like in the 1930s? I mean, New York in the 1930s had like four skyscrapers. The rest of the buildings were under 20 stories. Most of them were 5 stories, and great parts of Manhattan were suburbs, little homes on roads. And people don't think about that now. They're like, how come there's always little houses? Well, go look up a picture. Go look at a picture of Manhattan in 1925, 1935. They don't have a lot of high-rise buildings. That all came later. And so I have to kind of be aware of that and think about and then of course because magic exists, I have to take what the real world and twist it. No, I did this in the first book with the Empire State Building, and I got this wrong because the Empire State Building actually wasn't finished by the time my first book was during the time period. Somebody corrected me, and I'm like,
Oh,
okay, I'm just going to have to call that. This is not the same world. But and in my story, as it's being built, it's bought by a sorcerer, and sorcerers are basically Greek gods. A lot of power, no responsibility. No oversight, and but they're very, very few and far between. Manhattan has 6 of them because it's basically the greatest city in the world at this point. You know, and so this guy Andrew Barton, who's his and most sorcerers have a specialty. His specialty is electricity, and so he buys this building and he turns it into a Tesla tower, basically, and it's projecting power all over Manhattan. And the problem is, it's not a smooth projection. And so, as the further you get away from the tower, the weaker your power gets until you don't have the ability to get power through the air, and you have to hook up to Edison Electric, which is also running at the time, which of course transmits power by wire, and so that changes the way things work. The ritzy district of Manhattan is now all around Empire Tower. It's called a core, and they have all these skyscrapers and these wealthy homes. That's where the rich people want to live, right up next to the tower. And as you go out, it gets progressively less and less affluent. And so the divisions you see in modern New York don't apply. Just somebody on the west side, if they're far enough on the west side, it's still a crappy neighborhood. Because they're out of the power distribution. So you have to take all that into account. And thankfully, because I've never lived in New York, I've been there twice. My knowledge of New York is basically from watching movies and from reading maps. And so I made the decision very early on that I was not going to list specific addresses. I was not going to list. I was just going to something is in the mid ring, which is the sort of fairly decent power but not complete, and then you have the outer ring which doesn't get power. This is the mid ring address, and it's on the east side and the south. So I know that's the garment district, but I'm not going to call it the garment district unless it needs to be the garment district. And so I really just kind of play with New York geography and keep it very general because it's not exactly as it is in the modern world, but I don't want to spend the time to remake in Manhattan with maps. There are map guys who would do that. I am not one of them. So yeah, I do through. I come up with a plot, and I come up with another plot, and I just weave them together. And then the tertiary plot usually has something to do with there is an overarching story. Most of that will take place. That really gets going with World War II. But there are bad guys out there who are looking for stuff, and Alex has hit their radar a few times, and they're getting ready to hit back. So it'll be fun.
Nice. Just out of curiosity, what was the reasoning behind setting it in the 1920s, 1930s? I mean, the story would have just worked as well set in today's time. Like, what was that choice?
I am a huge old movie fan,
Okay.
and I love discovering things. If you watch The Maltese Falcon, which is an excellent old movie, the thing about The Maltese Falcon is it was shot in like early 1940, and it's set in like late 1930. And so the clothes are exactly what they would have worn. The furniture, the accoutrements, the technology, all of it is pretty much exactly as it was in the day. So it's literally a time capsule. You can look back and see how people, because normally, in Hollywood, they Hollywood it up. It's not exact. It's slicker. But they didn't do that when they were shooting movies back in the black and white era. And I had just watched The Maltese Falcon right before I decided to write this. And so there's a scene at the very beginning where Humphrey Bogart walks in to his office, says hi to his partner or his secretary, can't remember, goes and sits on his desk, rolls a cigarette. And then he gets this thing on his desk. It's like a metal match, and he pushes it down. There's a spark, and the match catches on fire. He lights a cigarette, and he drops the match back in the hole he got it in. And I'm like, what the heck is that? And what it is called a touch tip lighter. And that's exactly what it is. It's a metal match. It's sitting in a reservoir of lighter fluid. And lighter fluid is a lot like gasoline in the fact that it's too rich to burn. You can put a match out in a bucket of gasoline if you're fast enough because it's the fumes that burn.
Right.
And so he takes this thing out and he puts it on this little pad and he pushes down and then a spark strikes and the spark lights the match. And when he puts it back in, the thing goes into the reservoir of liquid. And even if the liquid is low, it's got a rubber seal on top. So as soon as that seal hits, there's no oxygen in there. It can't catch fire. It puts it out. And so it's just this perpetual match you can use. And I was just fascinated by that. And I've always loved old timey technology and learning about history. So setting in the 1930s for me was just a natural thing. I love the era. I love the technology. I love the language and the style. I'm a huge fan of Art Deco. Art Nouveau is amazing, but not as much. Art Nouveau is very good, but I like Art Deco better because I'm a guy who thinks in straight lines. So yeah, it was for me. It was a chance to play in a playground. And
Nice.
the other thing, of course, is, and this is a little bit of thought on my part, is not very many people are familiar with the 1930s. I mean, not really familiar. And so if I make mistakes, nobody's going to know. Nobody's going to know. And if I make a mistake, well, I say that, but then I'm going to give you an example where I got blasted. But the other thing is if I change something, so this technology doesn't work the way that it used to work. It's not a big deal because we're not in, this is a near Earth reality. We're not, this is an alternate history. It's not exactly the same. But in my first book, my character is going to go do some stuff where he thinks there might be gunplay. And so he's at a nightclub and he goes and he asks the nightclub guy to play In the Mood because In the Mood's got those great brassy interludes. And so he figures that's going to be loud enough that if a gun goes off, no one's going to hear it.
Mhm.
Problem, In the Mood came out a year later, something like, or 8 months later than when the book happened. And I got 2 or 3 people write me that, hey, do you know that In the Mood isn't, but they said In the Mood was based on another song, which sounds a lot like In the Mood. And you can have them do that. And so if you read my book now, it doesn't say In the Mood. It says whatever that other song was. Because nice thing about self-publishing is I can go back and change it. And the only thing that doesn't change are the physical copies of the book. And most people buy ebooks these days. So when they download the ebook, they get the update. People send me spelling errors all the time because, if what was it? Mark Twain once said that if you can't spell the same word three times in a different document the same way, you're not creative. Yeah. And so, or differently, I don't remember the exact quote, but yeah, but Mark Twain was a horrible speller. He was married to an English teacher, which is why he got published. She went and corrected all his work. but yeah, I can't. I'm a much better speller than I was in high school, but that's because I had to learn how to type. And when you have to type, you tell your brain A, G. You have to send those signals.
Right.
But yeah, I got this song doesn't work, and people send me spelling errors, and I correct them because again, ebooks. The person who downloads the next ebook is the update. If you delete it off of your Kindle and then load it back on, you get the update. So that way, my books get better and better. And I love people say, "I'm sorry, I don't mean to be mean or anything, but I found the spelling error." I'm like, "Sorry, thank you very much. You just made my book better. That's awesome." So, anyway.
Yeah, 90,000 words is a lot of words to get through when you're editing, and sometimes you just scan over them because you know what they're supposed to say.
Well, AI is getting better and better, and you can't take a 90,000 word novel and feed it into an AI and have the AI come back and find all your spelling errors because AI is choked to death on stuff that long. I have one an account to what is that one? I can't find it because my screen's covered. The tools. Here we go. What is it? Pro Writing Aid.
Mm.
And problem is they want you to write in their tool and it will correct you on the fly. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
I don't write it. I don't write in anybody else's tool. I write in an actual word processor where it does what word processors are supposed to do. Because most of these tools that they were designed to do whatever they wanted to do, and so the word processors usually are light on functionality.
Right.
And so what I wanted, and I met up with the Pro Writing Aid guy, one of the reps, and I said, listen. Here's you want me to write in your tool. I'm not going to do that. You want me to upload chapter by chapter and fix it on, as a chapter. And I said, I might do that, but probably not. What I want to do is upload my entire 90,000 word novel and let your thing chew on it for a while. The problem is when it does that, it dies and that's it. So it's probably doing something in there, but I don't want to wait 6 hours to find out.
Right.
And so I realized, that's not your intention for what you were supposed to do. But if anybody ever thought, you know what, we should make this available, I vote for that. So far I haven't heard back from them, but so I have humans that go over. I have an editor and I have a cleanup editor, and they both do very well. But I mean, they can't catch everything, especially if you're trying to correct my mistakes. That's a full time job. So,
well, earlier in the interview, you talked about you kind of break your day up into sections, and you kind of have to do that same thing as a career as writing too. Like, you're the creative side, the writer, the editor. Let's talk about the marketing side. What have you found success in? What have you, because it's a different world from when you first started writing Dragonlance to now. And it's probably since I had your book written down when the first book came out. Was it 2018?
First book came out in late December of 2018. Call it 2019.
2019. Yeah. Even from then until now, like marketing algorithms change. What have you found, and what have you done to kind of stay ahead of that?
Well, right now, I do market through Amazon, but Amazon's marketing is the people who make Amazon marketing available to small creators are chimpanzees. They're monkeys because they have all this data. Amazon has more data than the federal government. And if I told Amazon, listen, here's what in fact, Amazon's getting into AI. I mean, they're like, oh, we don't like AI, but they're getting into it because they're using it for marketing. If I could upload my book to Amazon, it could analyze that book. It could identify the various tropes and types in the book, create a profile, use that profile to match to everybody in their database who might want to buy my book, and show those ads directly to that person until that person either did something or said, I never want to see this ad again. It's all automated. It would cost them literally nothing. I mean, whatever the power for it, the electricity is really the only cost because they've got server space for years. They won't do that. Not in a million years. They will not let me have access to that data under any circumstances, and that's just dumb. I don't know why they do that. Probably because everybody would start selling really well. I don't know. Maybe that would cause them problems. I have no idea. Somewhere, someone had either made the decision or just decided indie authors are not a big enough market segment to cater to. You know, and they do this for other. I mean, if you're Coca-Cola, you get that data. I guarantee you. You know, if you're Pepsi, if you're McDonald's, if you're Husqvarna, if you're selling your GE, your LG, you get that data from Amazon. Absolutely, happily. They'll probably have a rep call you and help walk you through it. You know, but guys like me, So anyway, my best advertising is on Facebook, and Facebook is a program. A lot of the kids have left Facebook. It's a lot of older people, but a lot of older people are my audience. Really, my audience tends to skew 40 and up. You know, because kids aren't interested in the 1930s. They get interested later when they start learning about World War II, and what was that old joke about men thinking about the Roman Empire? I don't know where that stupid thing came from. Who thinks about the Roman Empire? But a lot of times these guys they find people on YouTube like the Fat Electrician who does all this stuff about military history. And you're like, wow, that's interesting. And then they find books that are written in that time period. Like, wow, that's interesting. Even though my books are not really historically accurate per se, but it has the flavor. There's the flavor of those great stories from World War II era, and they read that stuff and they like it. And so, for me, my audience tends to skew older because it takes a while for people to get enough information to understand that they like the 1930s. But so Facebook has been a great marketing place for me. I have not really seriously marketed on TikTok because again, TikTok is run by monkeys. Their algorithm is just all over the place. It's one of these things, and I've seen people who've done. Here's how you market on TikTok. You got to get on TikTok, and you got to look up whatever your genre is, and you never ever look at a video that isn't in your genre. So that way, when you put and you're not running ads because ads on TikTok is different things. Pay us. What you're doing is you're putting up TikToks that are designed to sell your book. And that way, if you've never gone outside of your genre, it shows them to people in your genre, which is what you want. You don't want them to be seen by people who are there for jump roping videos. The problem is this TikTok is interesting, and I'm a writer, and so I go out and here's a guy doing some fancy jump rope. I'm like, ooh, that's cool. And I ended up watching the whole video. I don't want to see jump rope videos. It was just there and it was interesting, so I watched it. And TikTok is just full of that. It's just
Right.
it's for a guy like me who has ADHD like a puppy. TikTok. I could be on TikTok all day. And just be having the time of my life. Oh, here's something interesting. Here's something about politics. Here's something about aviation. Here's something about video games. Here's something about dog walking. And none of it is about the genre of books that I'm writing. And so basically, what I've done is I've just polluted my algorithm. And so what I almost have to do if I want to go back is start a new account, and then try to only focus on the things that are right and then that are in my genre, and then market in that account. And so it's
Mhm.
like TikTok is weird. I would like to be able to point my videos at a group, but it kind of lets you do that, but not really. So the algorithm is more important than the keywords that you put in there, which are designed to tell the algorithm who you want to see your stuff.
Right.
But so yeah, that's advertising, and I change my ads about twice a month. Looking for ads that do better, and if an ad does well, I'll keep it. So and advertising for an indie is everything. If you don't do it, you're
Right.
not going anywhere.
No, you have to if you want to make a living doing it, you have to sell your books. Now part of marketing and the old adage, don't judge a book by its cover, but you do, and you have fantastic covers. Being an indie artist, you had to find the artist, or yeah, an indie author, you had to find the artist. What were you looking for, and how did you find your artist?
Well, my artist is a very talented gal in Romania. Her name is Mahalia Visu or Vice. I don't know how to pronounce her last name because I've never actually spoken to her. But I found her. I'll see if I can make this work here. Oh, that's right. Apple has redone how you get to your video or your camera roll because they were bored, I guess. Uh, but what I did, I understood. Thanks, Dad. Well, my dad's texting me. The uh, I understood what I wanted for my ads. I wanted to have a guy standing in front of a generic background, holding his hand up like this, and there would be this sacred geometry, this geometric shape hovering over his hand. It would be glowing. There might be fire. I don't know. I had a general idea. And so I started going through DeviantArt, and I started going through Pinterest. And what I was looking for is anybody who had something that was close to what I wanted. And then I'd contact them and say, hey, do you do covers? Well, I looked at a lot of stuff, and finally I found this. I don't know if you can see that. There we go. And I thought, this is perfect. If all I got to do is get her to take the book out, put the symbol in, and we got it. And so I contacted her, and I said, do you do covers? And she said, do I do covers? You bet I do covers. And so I said, I want this. Can you do another one like this? She said, I don't have to do another one. I can take that picture and manipulate it, because that's what she does, is photo manipulation. She's a Photoshop jockey and very, very good at it. And so as over the course of, well, do you want him to wear a hat? Oh, absolutely. I want him to wear a hat. Well, how about a trench coat? Can you put a trench coat on this guy? She said, oh, yeah, yeah. And what we ended up with is that. That's the same picture. And so once I got this picture from her, and she developed the Art Deco framing and lettering and all that stuff. She did all that. And it was perfect. And so I've used her ever since, because this just shows, I mean, this is one of my favorites right there, book 2.
Yeah.
It just shows you get a feel for what the book's about. And the cover absolutely has to tell you what the book's about before anybody reads anything, because the thing that stops people when they're walking along is, ooh, that's an interesting cover. And of course, I have 2 things going for me on that. I have the bright colors of the magic against a usually darker background, and I've got the guy in the 1930s Humphrey Bogart, attire. And so they look at that and they go, oh, this is some kind of magic detective stuff, before they even read the title. And I cheat villainously with this. I've been a reader since I was a little kid. And so I make sure that the number of the book is on the front and on the spine. So people look at this. Oh, wait a minute, this is book 5. Where's book 1? And a lot of times people look at it and say, ooh, this is book 5. That means there's 4 more books. Lots of there's a lot of strategy that goes into this, and I'll dip into it real quick for a minute. When I first started looking at being an indie author, people were giving advice about this, and a lot of them are online. You go to YouTube, you can find people talking about this. They said, listen, the audience you want is the Kindle Unlimited audience. I'm like, oh, wait a minute, this is the people who are going to rent your book. And they said, yeah, but the problem is some of these people are insane. They'll read a book a day. Some of them read multiple books a day. It's like some housewife, all the kids are out of the house, the husband's retired playing golf. What is she going to do? She says she sit down and read 2 or 3 books a day. And I'm like, okay. And they said, these people want to see 2 things. They want to see an ongoing storyline. They like it if it's finished, but as long as there's more than 4 or 5 books, they're okay, because they realize that you're serious. You're not going to pull a George R.R. Martin on them. Because they hate that. And the other thing they want is continuing characters that they can get behind, that they like. And so, if you read the Arcane Casebook, it is blatantly that. That I did that completely on purpose. And when I hit about book 4, I think, is when my KU reading numbers took off, because the people who thought, well, that looks interesting, let's see if he'll do anything with it. Those people decided at that point they were in. And it's been really good. This is the latest cover right there.
Book 12. That's awesome.
Book 12. Yeah, book 12. I can't even believe it's book 12. It's really book 12. Did I actually write 11 books? It kind of gets all muddled in your brain. Sometimes, what's book 4 about? Show me the cover. Yeah.
No, I'm the same way when I read them. Like, I can't tell you specifically, like, this happened in book 3, book 4, book 5, book 6, but like, I know the story. I know the order. And like, my wife will be like, oh, can you believe that happened in book 3 or whatever? I'm like, I don't remember that specific part. I know what happened during book 3, but like, if she's kind of refreshed my memory, I'm like, oh yeah, this is the big overarching story. But and that's all my books. Like, you just read so much that everything just kind of bleeds together.
Yeah.
Dan, our hour's about up. Do you have any final tips or tricks that you'd like to share, and tell people how to get a hold of you?
Okay, you can get a hold of me at danwillisauthor.com. That's my website. My email is dan@danwillisauthor.com. So I read emails. If you want to send an email, I will respond, unless you tell me don't respond. Sometimes people do that. I need to respond, but I just wanted to say this. Okay. But if you want to read my books, they're available on Amazon. I got audiobooks. I got ebooks. I even have hardcovers. So whatever format you would prefer, I've got it. My latest book, book 11, the audiobook is not out yet, unfortunately. My audiobook guy has gotten very busy, which is good. He's a good guy, and I like him to be successful, but he isn't going to be able to get to it till January, which means it won't be out till February. So a little bit more time on that particular audiobook. If you're looking to write books and you want to indie publish, be consistent. At least put out 2 books a year. You kind of don't get taken seriously. The only people who have the luxury of putting out 1 book a year are traditionally published. You know, and even those guys don't necessarily do it. Go look up Larry Correa. He still puts out 2 books a year, sometimes 3. Uh, and there's lots of places you can go to get help if you're an indie author who's struggling. Advertising is your golden key. We didn't talk about newsletters, but newsletters are also very important because it lets you talk to your readers and tell them cool stories. And you look up Steve Higgs if you want to see somebody. He puts out a newsletter every week. I don't know how he does it. I could barely put out the chapters I need to put out, much less a newsletter. But mine goes out once a month. But yeah, so that's. And I'm always open for people to ask questions. I may not have the answer, but I'll give you whatever I got. So it's been great talking to you. So unless there's anything else you want.
Perfect. Well, Dan, I appreciate it. And look forward to finishing the series, at least up to where you got. And I'll be one of those that voraciously reads on. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, Gangster should be out early part of the year. I'm planning on not letting Christmas mess me up, like it usually does. So I should probably be done with it by the middle of January at the absolute latest. But we'll see. I mean, I try not to make promises because then, I'll get sick, the car will crash.
Oh,
I'll
yeah.
discover an anime or a TV series and binge it, and suddenly I'm a week and a half behind. Yeah. So ADD, it's a terrible thing.
Terrible thing. Well, thank you once again.
Thank you for listening to the Troy Podcast. Please subscribe, like, and share with your friends.